August 1944.
France was collapsing for the German army.
Only weeks earlier, Allied soldiers had fought desperately to break out of the hedgerows of Normandy. Now, armored columns were racing across the French countryside at a pace few military planners had believed possible.
General George S.N.
Patton's Third Army advanced so quickly that maps often became outdated before headquarters could print new ones. Town after town fell into Allied hands.
German rear area units found themselves overrun before they realized the front had already moved past them.
Yet amid this spectacular advance, a new enemy emerged, one that bullets, artillery, and tanks could not destroy: fuel. The faster Patton's army advanced, the more gasoline it consumed. Every Sherman tank burned hundreds of gallons during sustained operations.
Half-tracks, trucks, jeeps, bulldozers, artillery tractors, ambulances, and engineering vehicles all competed for the same precious supply. Every mile gained toward Germany stretched American supply lines farther behind them. Fuel depots established on the Normandy beaches suddenly lay hundreds of kilometers away. Trucks carrying gasoline struggled to keep pace with an army moving faster than almost anyone had predicted. Ironically, the Allies had become victims of their own success. German commanders watched this development with cautious optimism. Their armies had suffered devastating defeats in Normandy. Entire divisions had ceased to exist. Thousands of vehicles littered French roads after the collapse of the Falaise pocket. Yet German intelligence noticed that American armored spearheads occasionally paused, despite encountering only scattered resistance. The reason was simple: the tanks had reached the limits of their fuel. Patton later admitted that his greatest obstacle during this period was not the German army. It was gasoline. Entire corps sometimes waited for fuel convoys before resuming their advance. Every hour lost allowed German commanders to rebuild defensive positions farther east. The race across France had become a contest between transportation and time. Behind the German front, however, another story unfolded. Throughout occupied France, the Wehrmacht had constructed an extensive network of fuel storage sites. Some were little more than concealed dumps hidden inside forests. Others occupied abandoned industrial facilities. Several enormous depots contained millions of liters of gasoline and diesel intended to sustain German armored formations operating across Western Europe. Many had been established months before the Allied invasion. German logisticians understood that modern mechanized warfare depended entirely upon fuel. Without it, tanks became stationary bunkers, trucks became useless piles of steel. Entire armies simply stopped moving. As German forces retreated rapidly after Normandy, many of these depots suddenly found themselves in dangerous positions. Orders arrived directing engineers to destroy supplies before American troops captured them. Explosives were prepared. Fuel drums were wired for demolition. Pipelines were scheduled for destruction. Storage tanks were to be ignited. Nothing valuable was supposed to fall into Allied hands. Yet war rarely follows perfectly written plans. Telephone lines had been cut by bombing. Messengers disappeared. Roads became clogged with retreating vehicles. Command structures collapsed under relentless pressure. Some depot commanders received contradictory instructions. Others received none at all. Several found themselves isolated from higher headquarters, uncertain whether to destroy their supplies immediately or wait for further orders. Time became their greatest enemy. Meanwhile, American reconnaissance units pushed farther ahead every day. Unlike the heavily armed spearheads that captured headlines, reconnaissance troops often traveled lightly. Their mission was simple but extraordinarily dangerous. Move ahead of the main force, locate enemy positions, identify bridges, discover roadblocks, observe troop movements. Most importantly, report anything valuable before the Germans could react. Among these reconnaissance officers served men whose decisions frequently shaped operations involving thousands of soldiers. One such officer would soon encounter something almost unbelievable. His patrol had spent the morning moving cautiously along narrow French roads bordered by wheat fields and scattered farmhouses. The resistance encountered seemed surprisingly light. Abandoned German trucks lined several intersections. Discarded helmets and equipment suggested a hurried withdrawal. Occasionally, civilians emerged cautiously from villages to greet the advancing Americans. The rapid German retreat created confusion everywhere. Maps often failed to reflect reality. Areas expected to contain strong enemy resistance sometimes proved completely deserted. Other seemingly quiet villages suddenly erupted with machine gun fire. Reconnaissance required constant vigilance. Late that afternoon, local civilians approached the patrol commander. Their information seemed unusual. Several villagers reported seeing large numbers of German fuel trucks entering an old industrial area weeks earlier. Since then, they claimed, German guards had prevented anyone from approaching. Even as the retreat accelerated, activity around the site continued. Columns of vehicles still entered and departed regularly. The civilians believed enormous fuel reserves remained inside. At first glance, the story sounded improbable. German units desperately needed fuel everywhere. Why would vast quantities remain
stored behind the front instead of reaching combat formations? The officer considered several possibilities. Perhaps the civilians misunderstood what they had seen. Perhaps the site contained ammunition rather than fuel. Perhaps German engineers had already destroyed everything. Yet the reports came from multiple independent witnesses. Their descriptions matched closely. Curiosity overcame skepticism. Rather than dismissing the information, the patrol decided to investigate. Approaching cautiously, the Americans left the main highway and followed a narrow secondary road winding through dense woodland. The farther they advanced, the more unusual the surroundings became. Fresh tire tracks covered the road despite little civilian traffic. Telephone wires ran toward the forest. Camouflaged observation posts appeared among the trees. Several recently abandoned defensive positions overlooked likely avenues of approach. Clearly, something important lay ahead. The patrol halted. Moving forward carelessly could lead directly into an ambush. The officer ordered several scouts to continue on foot. Silently, they advanced through thick undergrowth. Every sound seemed magnified. Broken branches, distant engines. Occasional voices carried faintly through the trees. After nearly an hour, one scout returned with remarkable news. He had located an enormous fenced installation hidden beneath elaborate camouflage. Rows upon rows of fuel drums stretched beneath camouflage nets. Large underground storage tanks connected by pipelines occupied the center of the facility. Dozens of fuel trucks stood parked nearby. Railway sidings entered the complex. The installation dwarfed anything the patrol had expected. Even more surprising, German guards appeared relatively few in number. The defenders behaved as though they expected no immediate threat. The rapid Allied advance had apparently outpaced German expectations. The depot remained intact because its commanders believed frontline units still protected the surrounding area. The American reconnaissance officer faced an extraordinary decision. His patrol lacked sufficient strength to attack directly, even if successful. They could not possibly secure such a massive installation alone, yet delaying too long risked discovery. Once German commanders realized American forces had reached the area, demolition orders would almost certainly follow. Every hour mattered. The obvious solution involved reporting the discovery immediately. Radio operators established contact with higher headquarters. Initial responses reflected disbelief. The reported size seemed almost impossible. Officers questioned the estimates repeatedly. Could the scouts have mistaken ammunition for fuel? Had they exaggerated the number of storage tanks? Were they certain the Germans had not already prepared demolition charges? The reconnaissance officer remained confident. His men had observed fuel trucks. They had identified storage pipelines. They had smelled gasoline drifting through the trees. There could be little doubt. The headquarters staff quickly grasped the significance. American armored units advancing across France desperately needed fuel. Capturing such a depot intact could sustain operations for days. Destroying it would deny the Germans desperately needed supplies. Either outcome offered enormous military value. The challenge involved acting before the enemy realized the danger. Orders soon arrived: maintain surveillance, avoid detection, await reinforcements. The reconnaissance patrol established concealed observation posts overlooking the facility. Throughout the evening, they watched German activity carefully. Fuel trucks continued entering and leaving. Guards changed shifts. Mechanics serviced vehicles. Everything appeared remarkably routine. No signs suggested preparations for demolition. Apparently, the depot commander still believed the front remained safely distant. Night fell across the forest. American observers remained hidden. Occasionally headlights flashed briefly between trees before disappearing beneath camouflage shelters. Generators hummed quietly inside the complex. Telephone lines carried messages whose contents remained unknown. The patrol commander realized that surprise represented his greatest advantage. If the Germans discovered American reconnaissance teams nearby, everything would change instantly. Fuel drums could be ignited, pipelines destroyed, storage tanks blown apart. Months of accumulated reserves would vanish in towering columns of fire visible for kilometers. Patience therefore became essential. Several tense hours passed without incident.
Just before dawn, additional American vehicles arrived quietly, not an armored division, not an entire regiment. Only a relatively small force assembled specifically for rapid action. Its commander listened carefully as the reconnaissance officer
Described every observation collected during the previous day.
Maps spread across the hood of a jeep. Scouts pointed toward guard posts, fences, entrances, and probable defensive positions. Every available detail mattered. The briefing revealed something extraordinary, although the depot itself contained immense
Quantities of fuel, its defenders appeared surprisingly weak. Most nearby German combat units had already withdrawn eastward. The guards consisted largely of logistics personnel, military police, and a handful of security troops. They possessed rifles, machine guns, and several light anti-aircraft weapons.
What they lacked was heavy armor. This presented an unusual opportunity. Rather than destroying the depot through artillery bombardment, perhaps it could actually be seized intact. The risks remained enormous. A single determined German officer could order demolition charges detonated. One exploding storage tank might ignite dozens more. Thousands of gallons of gasoline could transform the entire installation into an uncontrollable inferno within minutes. Speed therefore became everything. The American commander devised a daring plan.
Instead of mounting a slow, deliberate assault that would alert the defenders, his force would rely upon surprise, confusion, and aggressive action. Vehicles would approach rapidly from multiple directions. Key entrances would be secured immediately. Communications buildings would be seized before demolition orders could spread. Engineers would search for explosive charges, while infantry isolated remaining defenders. Success depended almost entirely upon the Germans hesitating for only a few precious minutes.
As dawn illuminated the French countryside, the American soldiers completed final preparations. Weapons were checked, radios tested. Engines started quietly beneath the trees. The reconnaissance officer who had first discovered the depot prepared to guide the assault force along hidden approaches known only to his patrol. If everything went according to plan, one of the largest German fuel reserves in the region might fall into Allied hands without being destroyed. If they failed, the depot would disappear in flames before the first American truck could carry away a single gallon.
The next few hours would determine whether a handful of American soldiers could accomplish something almost unbelievable, capturing an entire German fuel depot before its own defenders had time to destroy it. The American force moved into position just before sunrise.
A thin layer of morning mist still hung over the French countryside, limiting visibility and muffling the sound of engines.
The reconnaissance officer who had first located the depot rode at the front of the column, carefully guiding the vehicles along narrow farm roads that bypassed the main German checkpoints. Every turn had been memorized during the previous day's surveillance. There could be no mistakes now.
If even one sentry detected the approaching Americans too early, the Germans would have enough time to ignite the fuel stores, and the entire operation would end in a towering wall of fire visible for miles. The attacking force was intentionally small. The commander understood that speed mattered far more than numbers. A large formation would require additional coordination, produce more noise, and increase the likelihood of early detection. Instead,
he relied upon experienced infantrymen supported by several armored vehicles and engineers trained to secure industrial facilities. Their objective was unlike most combat missions. Normally, soldiers attacked enemy positions by using overwhelming firepower to eliminate resistance. Here, excessive firepower could become disastrous.
A single tracer round striking a leaking fuel drum might ignite an explosion capable of destroying everything they hoped to capture. Every soldier received the same instruction: fire only when absolutely necessary. Protect the fuel, not destroy it. As the first American vehicles emerged from the trees, the Germans remained unaware of the danger. Guards at the main entrance expected supply trucks or retreating military units, not Allied soldiers who had advanced far beyond the front line. Several sentries looked toward the approaching vehicles with curiosity rather than alarm. That hesitation lasted only a few seconds. American soldiers accelerated toward the gate. Machine gunners covered the guard towers, while infantry rushed forward before the defenders could organize themselves. The surprise proved nearly complete. Several German guards surrendered immediately. Others reached for their weapons, but found themselves surrounded before firing a shot within moments. The main entrance belonged to the Americans. Elsewhere around the perimeter, additional assault teams struck simultaneously. One group secured the communications building. Another raced toward the administration offices where demolition orders might be issued. Engineers hurried toward the storage tanks, searching for explosives attached to pipelines and pumping equipment.
Every minute increased the chances that the depot would survive intact inside the complex. Confusion spread rapidly. The depot's personnel had expected retreating German units. Instead, American troops suddenly appeared from multiple directions.
Drivers abandoned fuel trucks where they stood. Clerks fled from offices carrying maps and documents. Mechanics emerged from maintenance sheds, uncertain whether to fight or escape. Several officers attempted organizing resistance, but the speed of the assault denied them the opportunity. The depot had been designed to resist sabotage and air attack, and he had never been prepared for an armored raid arriving without warning. The greatest danger remained the demolition charges. German military doctrine required important fuel supplies to be destroyed rather than captured.
Engineers had prepared explosive systems throughout the installation. Charges surrounded major storage tanks. Additional explosives had been attached to pumping stations. Fuel pipelines contained carefully positioned demolition points intended to render the entire facility useless within minutes. American engineers knew exactly what to look for, working under tremendous pressure. They spread across the depot searching for detonators, blasting caps, electrical wires, and timing devices. Every unexploded charge they removed represented another section of the depot saved from destruction.
Several engineers later recalled that this part of the mission proved more nerve-wracking than the assault itself. A firefight involved visible danger. Searching for hidden explosives inside a fuel depot required trusting that every step would not trigger catastrophe. Meanwhile, resistance stiffened near the railway sidings. A group of German soldiers occupied several freight cars and opened fire with machine guns. The exchange remained brief but intense. American riflemen maneuvered carefully between rows of
fuel drums, avoiding unnecessary gunfire toward the storage areas. Within minutes, the defenders either surrendered or withdrew deeper into the complex. The Americans continued advancing. Every building had to be secured, every warehouse searched, every storage tank inspected. The scale of the depot gradually became apparent.
Rows of steel drums stretched farther than anyone had imagined. Large cylindrical tanks dominated the central storage area. Pumping stations connected underground pipelines leading toward nearby rail facilities. Hundreds of fuel trucks stood parked in neat rows, many already loaded for transportation.
The reconnaissance officer who had discovered the depot realized his initial estimates had actually been too conservative. The installation proved even larger than first believed. Radio operators immediately informed higher headquarters. Their response reflected astonishment.
Staff officers requested repeated confirmation. Was the depot truly intact?
Had demolition charges been secured?
How much fuel remained? The answers exceeded expectations. The Americans had captured one of the largest German fuel installations yet found during the advance across France. Convoys began moving almost immediately. Tank trucks rolled through the newly secured gates while quartermaster officers organized temporary distribution points. Fuel samples underwent rapid testing to ensure compatibility with American vehicles.
Mechanics examined pumping equipment. Engineers restored damaged sections of pipeline that German personnel had begun preparing for demolition. The depot transformed almost overnight from a German logistical center into an American one. The irony could not have been greater. Fuel intended to sustain German armored divisions would now propel the very forces pursuing them. Captured documents added another layer to the story. Inside the administration offices, intelligence officers discovered detailed inventory records.
Maps identified additional storage sites throughout the region.
Transportation schedules listed fuel shipments planned for German formations retreating toward the Seine River. Some documents even contained emergency destruction procedures outlining exactly how the depot should have been demolished if capture appeared imminent. Those orders had arrived too late. The speed of the Allied advance had overtaken German planning. Several prisoners later explained the confusion. Communications with higher headquarters had become increasingly unreliable during the previous week.
Telephone lines failed repeatedly. Radio traffic remained overloaded. Roads filled with retreating military units and civilian refugees delayed couriers carrying written instructions. The depot commander had repeatedly requested updated guidance but received little useful information. Believing frontline units still protected the area, he postponed demolition in hopes that the fuel could yet support future German operations. That decision proved costly. One American intelligence officer later remarked that the Germans had become
victims of the same uncertainty affecting many retreating armies.
destroy supplies too early, and friendly forces lose desperately needed resources, wait too long, and the enemy captures everything intact. The depot commander had chosen the second option. American engineers spent the remainder of the day ensuring every explosive device had been removed. Several charges were discovered already connected to storage tanks. Others remained hidden beneath pumping equipment. The work demanded extraordinary caution. Even disconnecting electrical wires incorrectly could trigger an explosion. Despite these dangers, the engineers completed their task without igniting the depot.
Only then did the full value of the capture become apparent. Thousands upon thousands of gallons of fuel stood ready for immediate use. American quartermasters wasted no time. Sherman tanks, arriving nearly empty, departed with full fuel tanks. Truck columns resumed movement. Artillery tractors refueled before continuing east. The depot rapidly became one of the busiest logistical centers in the region. For soldiers at the front, the change appeared almost miraculous. Units previously restricted by fuel shortages suddenly received fresh supplies.
Convoys that might otherwise have traveled all the way back toward Normandy instead loaded fuel captured from the enemy only hours earlier. The advance regained momentum. Patton had often remarked that armies ran on gasoline as much as courage. Here was proof. German commanders soon learned what had happened. Reports reached higher headquarters describing the sudden loss of a major fuel installation at first. Many refused to believe the information. Surely such an important depot would have been destroyed before capture.
Follow-up reports confirmed the worst. Not only had the depot been lost, but much of its fuel was already being distributed to advancing American formations. The reaction bordered on disbelief. Germany already faced a severe fuel crisis. Synthetic fuel plants suffered repeated bombing. Romanian oil production had declined dramatically. Transportation difficulties delayed deliveries throughout occupied Europe. Losing an intact depot represented far more than a local setback. It deepened a strategic problem that had been growing for months. Several German armored units expecting resupply never received it. Orders directing fuel trucks toward assembly areas suddenly became meaningless. Convoys already en route encountered advancing American forces or abandoned their cargo during chaotic retreats. The carefully organized logistical network supporting German operations in western France continued unraveling. American soldiers inspecting the depot noticed another revealing detail. Many storage tanks remained nearly full despite disparate fuel shortages at the front. The contradiction illustrated the collapse of German transportation rather than any abundance of resources. Fuel still existed. The Wehrmacht increasingly lacked the secure roads, functioning railways, and available trucks necessary to deliver it where it was needed most. Strategic bombing, partisan attacks, destroyed bridges, and the speed of the Allied advance had disrupted the entire system. The fuel depot became a symbol of that failure. Supplies without transportation possessed little military value. For the Americans, however, transportation remained available. Within hours, captured German fuel traveled in American trucks toward American armored divisions advancing deeper into France. The logistical advantage shifted immediately. What had once sustained one army now strengthened another. As evening approached, the depot remained firmly under American control. Engineers continued inspecting every section of the installation, while intelligence officers analyzed captured documents late into the night. The reconnaissance officer whose curiosity had led to the discovery quietly walked among endless rows of fuel drums, fully appreciating what his patrol had uncovered. A single decision to investigate local reports, instead of dismissing them, had preserved enough fuel to support an advancing army at one of the most critical moments of the campaign. Yet even greater discoveries awaited inside the captured files and storage facilities. They would reveal not only how important this depot had been to German plans, but also how its loss accelerated the collapse of the Wehrmacht's ability to wage mobile warfare across France, turning one daring raid into a logistical victory whose effects reached far beyond the battlefield where it had begun. With the depot finally secured, American engineers and quartermaster officers began the painstaking process of determining exactly what had fallen into their hands. The first estimates had already suggested an enormous prize, but as inventory, teams moved methodically through the sprawling complex. Those estimates continued to grow. Warehouse after warehouse revealed additional fuel drums stacked in carefully organized rows.
Underground storage tanks extended beneath areas that had appeared empty from the surface. Railroad sidings held dozens of tanker cars waiting to distribute gasoline to German armored formations. What had begun as an unexpected tactical success was rapidly proving to be one of the most valuable logistical captures of the Allied advance across France. The depot had clearly been designed to support sustained mechanized operations, unlike temporary fuel dumps established near the front. This installation functioned as a regional distribution center. Fuel arrived by rail from refineries and storage facilities farther east before being transferred into tanker trucks that supplied divisions operating across western France. The organization impressed even experienced American logistics officers. Every storage area carried detailed identification markings. Pumping stations connected multiple sections of the depot. Maintenance buildings contained spare pumps, hoses, valves, and repair equipment. The Germans had invested enormous effort into constructing a system capable of moving thousands of gallons of fuel every day. Now that entire system belonged to the Allies. The intelligence value proved almost as important as the fuel itself. Captured filing cabinets contained transportation schedules covering several weeks. Maps identified roads preferred for fuel convoys. Maintenance records revealed how frequently German units requested emergency deliveries. Inventory reports demonstrated which formations received priority. The documents painted a detailed picture of an army struggling desperately to balance dwindling supplies against increasing operational demands. American intelligence officers worked almost continuously. Every document was examined, every map copied, every order translated. The information offered an unusually clear window into German logistical problems during the final months of the campaign in France. One discovery particularly attracted attention. Several scheduled fuel shipments had never departed. According to the records, enough gasoline remained inside the depot to supply multiple armored formations. The problem had not been production. The problem had become transportation. Repeated Allied bombing had damaged railway junctions, bridges lay in ruins, fuel trucks suffered constant attack from Allied fighter bombers. Drivers frequently abandoned vehicles during chaotic retreats. The fuel existed. Germany simply could not move enough of it to the troops who desperately needed it. For American commanders, this confirmed what many had already suspected. The German army still possessed dangerous fighting power, but its ability to maneuver was steadily collapsing. Mechanized warfare depended upon movement. Without reliable fuel deliveries, even the most powerful tanks became immobile. A Panther without gasoline offered little more military value than a bunker. A Tiger with empty fuel tanks became an obstacle rather than an asset. As reports from the depot reached higher headquarters, staff officers immediately recognized an opportunity extending far beyond simple resupply. If captured fuel could sustain the current pace of advance, American armored divisions might maintain pressure on retreating German forces without waiting for lengthy supply convoys from Normandy. Every additional day of rapid movement increased the chances of trapping withdrawing enemy formations before they established new defensive positions. Patton understood this instinctively. Throughout the campaign, he repeatedly emphasized relentless pursuit. Allowing German units time to reorganize often meant fighting them again under more favorable conditions. Maintaining momentum therefore became essential. Captured fuel made that possible. Within hours, long columns of American tanker trucks entered the depot. Military police organized traffic at the entrances while engineers inspected loading equipment. German pumps, designed to serve Wehrmacht fuel trucks, now filled American vehicles instead. The scene carried a certain irony. Only days earlier, German drivers had stood at these same pumps preparing fuel shipments for units attempting to stop the Allied advance. Now American soldiers calmly performed the same work for the opposite purpose. Mechanics carefully tested the captured gasoline before widespread distribution. Fortunately, most proved fully compatible with American equipment. The Sherman tank's engines accepted the fuel without difficulty. Truck units reported no significant problems. This compatibility eliminated the need for complicated processing or blending. The depot could begin supporting combat operations almost immediately. Nearby armored divisions noticed the difference quickly. Tank commanders who had previously rationed movement suddenly received authorization to resume offensive operations. Reconnaissance patrols pushed farther ahead. Supply officers relaxed emergency conservation measures. Truck convoys no longer calculated every gallon with desperate precision. The effect spread throughout the advancing army.
Fuel transformed into speed.
Speed became pressure. Pressure prevented German forces from organizing effective resistance. German commanders, meanwhile, struggled to understand how Allied armored units continued advancing despite already extended supply lines. Interrogations
Of captured American soldiers offered little explanation.
Most frontline troops knew only that fuel kept arriving. Few understood where it originated. German intelligence gradually assembled the truth through scattered reports from retreating units. The captured depot had become an Allied supply center. Its loss extended far beyond the fuel itself. The installation had also contained transportation equipment. Dozens of fuel trucks either fell into American hands or were destroyed before German crews could escape. Workshops filled with repair tools vanished. Communication equipment disappeared. Maps identifying additional supply routes became Allied intelligence. An entire logistical hub had changed sides almost overnight. The psychological effect upon German logistics personnel proved considerable.
Fuel depot commanders elsewhere suddenly realized how vulnerable their own installations had become. Some reacted by destroying supplies immediately whenever American reconnaissance appeared nearby. Others accelerated evacuation efforts. Several moved demolition charges into position days earlier than originally planned. The fear of another surprise capture spread rapidly. Ironically, these precautionary demolitions sometimes harmed German operations almost as much as Allied action. Fuel destroyed prematurely could no longer support retreating formations. The simple possibility of capture forced difficult decisions everywhere. American officers recognized this secondary advantage. Even depots never actually attacked might now be destroyed by their own defenders out of caution. The mere existence of successful raids influenced German behavior across the theater. One logistics officer later observed that victory often produced consequences extending far beyond the battlefield where it occurred.
The depot illustrated that principle perfectly. Engineers examining the facility also admired the quality of German construction. Underground storage tanks offered excellent protection against air attack. Camouflage remained highly effective. Drainage systems reduced fire hazards. Emergency shut-off valves allowed sections of the depot to be isolated if damaged. The installation reflected careful planning by experienced military engineers. Its capture therefore denied Germany not only fuel but a sophisticated logistical asset requiring considerable time and resources to replace.
Captured German personnel provided additional insight during interrogation. Several admitted they had believed the Americans remained many kilometers away. The speed of Patton's advance had completely disrupted their understanding of the battlefield.
Maps no longer reflected reality. Telephone communications repeatedly failed. Orders arrived too late to prove useful. One officer confessed that he had gone to bed convinced friendly combat units still protected the depot. He awoke surrounded by American soldiers. Such confusion increasingly characterized German rear areas during the final months of the campaign. The front moved faster than information. American reconnaissance units repeatedly exploited that advantage. Rather than attacking only heavily defended positions, they searched constantly for opportunities created by German uncertainty. Bridges, road junctions, headquarters, supply dumps, fuel depots. Every valuable objective became vulnerable once rapid movement shattered normal communications. The officer whose patrol had first investigated the village's reports received considerable praise from his superiors.
Yet he consistently emphasized that success depended upon more than individual initiative. The civilians had provided the first clues. Reconnaissance soldiers had confirmed them. Higher headquarters had acted quickly. Engineers had neutralized demolition charges. Quartermaster units had immediately integrated the depot into American supply operations. The achievement reflected cooperation across numerous specialties. No single individual could have accomplished it alone. This lesson echoed throughout the Allied advance. Victories rarely depended solely upon dramatic battlefield heroics. Often, they resulted from intelligence, logistics, planning, and rapid decision-making working together at precisely the right moment. As American armored columns continued driving
eastward, many crews remained unaware that the gasoline powering their vehicles had originally been intended for German tanks.
German commanders focused upon roads ahead rather than the origins of their fuel. Truck drivers cared only that their tanks remained full. Artillery batteries continued firing. Reconnaissance patrols advanced. The campaign never paused long enough
for most soldiers to appreciate the remarkable journey taken by the gasoline flowing through their engines.
German commanders, however,
understood the implications immediately. Every gallon captured represented one unavailable for their own retreating forces. Fuel shortages, already severe, became even worse. Orders restricting vehicle movement grew increasingly common.
Some units received permission to move only during emergencies. Others abandoned heavy equipment because available fuel had to be reserved for combat vehicles. Mechanized warfare gradually gave way to desperate improvisation. Horses once again hauled supplies. Infantry marched on foot. Powerful tanks remained hidden because moving them risked exhausting irreplaceable fuel reserves. Military historians often describe logistics as the invisible side of warfare, because its greatest successes usually occur without attracting attention.
No newspaper headline celebrated a tanker truck completing its journey safely. Few photographers documented engineers disconnecting demolition charges beneath storage tanks. Yet these quiet achievements often determined whether armies advanced or stopped. The captured fuel depot represented exactly that kind of victory. Its importance lay not in dramatic combat, but in enabling thousands of ordinary military tasks that collectively sustained an offensive across an entire country. As September approached, the effects became increasingly apparent. American armored formations continued pressing toward the German frontier with remarkable speed, while retreating Wehrmacht units struggled to coordinate withdrawals amid worsening shortages of fuel and transportation. Intelligence officers examining the captured depot's records reached a sobering conclusion.
The installation had been only one part of a much larger German supply network that was unraveling under relentless Allied pressure.
Its capture had not merely deprived one local commander of fuel, it had accelerated the collapse of an entire logistical system already stretched to the breaking point.
In the weeks after the raid, Allied analysts would measure its impact, while German officers would look back on the loss as yet another sign that the war in Western Europe had slipped beyond their ability to control. As Allied armies pushed toward
the German frontier during the autumn of 1944, the captured fuel depot quietly faded from newspaper headlines.
Reporters preferred dramatic photographs of Sherman tanks crossing rivers, infantry liberating towns, and fighter aircraft streaking across European skies. Very few stories focused on quartermaster officers directing fuel convoys or engineers inspecting storage tanks. Yet inside headquarters, experienced commanders understood that the successful seizure of the German depot represented far more than an isolated raid.
It demonstrated a principle that had quietly shaped the entire campaign across France. Every mile advanced depended not only upon courage at the front, but upon the uninterrupted flow of fuel behind it. The captured depot quickly became a case study within Allied logistics staffs. Officers carefully documented every stage of the operation: reconnaissance reports, planning conferences, engineer actions, inventory procedures, distribution methods. Lessons learned were circulated throughout other advancing armies. The conclusion appeared remarkably straightforward: whenever possible, enemy supply facilities should be captured rather than destroyed. Every intact depot represented two victories at once. The Germans lost valuable resources. The Allies immediately gained them. Throughout the remainder of the campaign, reconnaissance patrols received increasing emphasis on locating bridges, transportation hubs, ammunition dumps, and fuel storage sites before retreating German forces could demolish them. Speed became the decisive factor. Every hour gained might preserve thousands of gallons of gasoline or hundreds of tons of supplies. German commanders recognized the growing danger after the loss of several important logistical installations during the rapid retreat across France. Demolition procedures became increasingly strict. Rear area commanders received direct orders requiring immediate destruction whenever capture appeared possible. Explosives remained permanently connected to storage tanks. Engineers rehearsed demolition drills repeatedly. Some depots established permanent guard detachments tasked solely with preventing intact capture. Ironically, these precautions created new problems. Several fuel installations were destroyed unnecessarily because nervous commanders believed American reconnaissance units were closer than they actually were. Fuel desperately needed by retreating German divisions disappeared into towering columns of black smoke without ever benefiting either side.
Fear itself became a weapon. The successful American raid influenced German decision-making far beyond the original battlefield. Meanwhile, the fuel captured during the operation continued powering Allied vehicles for weeks. Sherman tanks consumed it while advancing toward the Moselle River.
Truck convoys burned it carrying artillery ammunition. Engineering equipment used it while repairing roads and bridges. Ambulances transporting wounded soldiers relied upon the very gasoline once reserved for German formations. Few American drivers considered its origin. To them, fuel simply arrived where it was needed. Yet quartermaster officers appreciated the remarkable efficiency. Every gallon captured reduced the burden upon already stretched supply lines extending back toward Normandy, General Patton repeatedly reminded his staff that logistics determined the pace of war.
His famous remark that armies advanced on fuel rather than wishes reflected practical experience rather than colorful language. Again and again during the campaign, operational opportunities depended less upon enemy resistance than upon gasoline deliveries.
The captured depot therefore represented something far greater than material gain. It bought time. Time allowed armored divisions to maintain pressure. Time prevented German forces from regrouping. Time accelerated the collapse of organized resistance across France. After the war, American military historians examined numerous operations contributing to the rapid liberation of Western Europe. Naturally, famous battles received enormous attention: the breakout from Normandy, the Falaise Pocket, the liberation of Paris. The crossing of the Seine, yet buried within logistics reports, appeared quieter stories whose importance professional soldiers immediately recognized. The capture of enemy supply installations ranked among them. These operations rarely involved massive battles. Often they depended upon initiative displayed by relatively junior officers willing to investigate unusual intelligence, move aggressively, and exploit opportunities before the enemy reacted. The fuel depot raid became one such example. The reconnaissance
officer who first investigated reports from local civilians never considered himself the hero of the operation.
Years later, when interviewed about the campaign, he consistently emphasized the role played by French civilians who risked approaching Allied patrols with valuable information. Without them, the depot might never have been discovered until German engineers destroyed it. Their courage reflected a broader reality throughout occupied Europe. Resistance fighters, farmers, railway workers, local officials, and ordinary civilians frequently supplied intelligence that proved invaluable to advancing Allied forces. Sometimes that intelligence revealed troop movements, sometimes hidden bridges, sometimes ammunition dumps. Occasionally, as in this case, it revealed logistical prizes capable of influencing operations across an entire region. American intelligence officers also studied captured German documents recovered from the depot long after the campaign moved eastward. The paperwork painted an increasingly grim picture of Germany's strategic situation. Fuel requests exceeded available supplies. Priority lists forced commanders to choose which divisions received gasoline and which remained immobilized. Repeated references appeared regarding synthetic fuel production disrupted by Allied bombing.
Transportation delays grew steadily worse, even when sufficient fuel existed somewhere within the Reich. Delivering it safely to combat units became an increasingly difficult challenge. The captured depot illustrated this contradiction perfectly.
The gasoline had been available. The Wehrmacht simply lost the ability to use it before the Americans seized it. Historians today often describe Germany's late-war fuel crisis as one of the decisive factors leading to defeat. Aircraft remained grounded. Training exercises were reduced. Tank crews practiced without driving. Entire mechanized formations waited for deliveries that never arrived. The loss of any major storage facility therefore carried consequences extending well beyond its immediate location. Every captured depot deepened shortages already affecting every branch of the German military. The Allies faced logistical difficulties as well. Rapid advances constantly threatened to outrun supply lines. Convoys traveled enormous distances. Road congestion delayed deliveries. Weather complicated transportation. Nevertheless, American industry and transportation networks consistently adapted. Temporary pipelines extended across France. Railways reopened quickly after repairs. Truck companies operated around the clock. Captured fuel depots complemented rather than replaced this vast logistical effort. They represented unexpected bonuses enhancing an already powerful supply system. Military academies later incorporated such operations into professional education. Students studying operational art learned that intelligence, logistics, and maneuver often produced greater long-term effects than isolated tactical victories. Capturing supplies preserved momentum. Destroying enemy resources weakened future resistance. The combination multiplied battlefield success. Professional soldiers recognized these principles regardless of nationality. Former German officers participating in post-war military studies frequently acknowledged that Allied logistical flexibility had become impossible to match during the final year of the war. Several admitted that rapid American exploitation repeatedly disrupted carefully prepared withdrawal plans. Others observed that rear area security had become increasingly difficult once Allied reconnaissance advanced so aggressively. Fuel depots, once considered relatively safe behind the front, suddenly required protection almost equal to combat positions.
Resources diverted toward guarding logistics naturally reduced strength available elsewhere. The ripple effects continued expanding. Perhaps the most enduring lesson involved initiative. The operation began not because someone followed a predetermined
plan, but because one reconnaissance officer chose to investigate local reports instead of dismissing them. Military history contains countless examples where valuable intelligence remained unused because commanders considered it unreliable or insignificant. In this instance, curiosity produced extraordinary results. The villagers noticed unusual activity. The patrol listened. Scouts confirmed the information. Headquarters acted quickly. Engineers secured the objective. Quartermaster units exploited it immediately. Success emerged through a chain of decisions in which every participant performed his role effectively. Break any link within that chain, and the outcome might have been entirely different. Had the reconnaissance patrol ignored the civilians, the depot would likely have remained undiscovered until German demolition teams destroyed it. Had headquarters delayed authorizing action, retreating units might have carried out demolition orders.
Had engineers failed to locate explosive charges in time, the storage tanks would have erupted in flames before the first American fuel truck arrived. Every stage depended upon timing. The timing reflected the operational tempo achieved by Allied forces during the summer of 1944.
The Germans repeatedly found themselves reacting rather than planning. Events moved faster than orders. Front lines shifted before maps could be updated. Supply officers struggled to predict where fuel would be needed because armored divisions advanced farther every day than previous estimates suggested. The captured depot became one visible symptom of that accelerating collapse. Even today, historians remain fascinated by dramatic armored battles involving Panthers, Tigers, and Shermans exchanging fire across open fields. Those engagements certainly deserve attention.
Yet beneath every famous battle lay a quieter struggle fought by logisticians, engineers, truck drivers, mechanics, railway workers, and reconnaissance patrols. Without their efforts, tanks never reached the battlefield. Artillery remained silent. Aircraft stayed grounded. Entire offensive stalled. The raid against the German fuel depot perfectly illustrates this overlooked dimension of warfare. Its participants did not capture international headlines, nor no famous photograph immortalized the moment the depot changed hands.
Nevertheless, the operation produced consequences extending far beyond
the fences surrounding one storage installation. Fuel,
intended to halt the Allied advance,
instead accelerated it. Supplies carefully
accumulated over months vanished into the enemy's logistical system within hours. German commanders lost not merely a depot, but another opportunity
to slow the relentless momentum carrying Allied armies
toward the Reich itself. Looking back after
decades of historical research,
one fact stands above all others. The operation succeeded because it combined intelligence, speed, surprise, engineering skill, and logistical planning into a single coordinated effort. It was never simply the story of one daring officer acting alone. It was the story of an officer who recognized an opportunity,
trusted the information provided by local civilians, acted before the enemy could react,
and relied upon dozens of soldiers from different specialties to turn that opportunity into a strategic success. The depot itself eventually disappeared into history,
its fuel burned by countless American vehicles as the war rolled eastward. But its capture remained an enduring reminder that, in modern warfare,
some of the greatest victories are won not by destroying the enemy's supplies,
but by taking them intact and using them to fuel your own advance.